what really happened with your host, Mike Rivero. You're listening to the Republic Broadcasting Network, where you'll find out what the Fukushima's going on.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It is Friday, November 17th, 2017. Thank goodness it's Friday. Thank goodness it's Friday. It's also the peak of the Leonids meteor shower for those of you who are out before sunrise in the morning. See some of those shooting stars overhead. We have got a lot of stuff to talk about today. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. Mike is in our control room, ready to answer the phone when you call on in. And, of course, in hour number 3 today, the lovely Lady Claire will be joining us with her unique perspective on the world here. So let's get right on into the news. Now, back when Donald Trump was talking about the possibility that our elections might be tampered with or rigged, and everybody's saying, oh, it could never happen. Obama was saying it's too complex, couldn't possibly happen. And Hillary Clinton was out there saying, oh, it's a horrifying idea. Then, of course, Hillary lost, and immediately it changed around. Oh, of course the election was rigged. Russia rigged it. And apparently Hillary Clinton is now back out there claiming that Russia stole the election from her and gave it to Donald Trump. And again, pushing this story with absolutely zero evidence about it. And she's upping the ante, saying that there's no question that Russia changed the outcome of the general election last year for the presidency. And so they're back to pushing this nonsense. And for somebody who claimed that she wasn't planning on ever running for office again, she certainly sounds like she still wants that Oval Office by hook or by crook. Now, getting on to the issue of Judge Roy Moore, he's starting to go on the offensive. He's taking the initiative, and he's out there saying that all of this smear job is an effort by Mitch McConnell to steal the election, because apparently McConnell was backing another GOP candidate in the Alabama Senate race that Judge Roy Moore defeated, and Mitch is apparently very unhappy. The concern appears to be that Judge Roy Moore, being kind of an independent outsider, he might cast swing votes and offset John McCain, who's supposed to be a Republican but tends to side with the Democrats more and more these days. Now, Roy Moore's lawyer is out there saying it is pretty obvious at this point that the yearbook inscription is forged. And basically, the issue that they have raised is the fact that after the Roy Moore in the yearbook, there are the letters D.A. which was explained to us as meaning district attorney. And he wasn't a district attorney at the time. He was an assistant district attorney at the time. But it turns out it's got nothing to do with his job, because when he was on the bench and he would be writing out legal orders, his assistant would be required to initial after the name so that they knew who processed it. And Judge Moore's assistant in this divorce case that involved Ms. Nelson was Delbert Adams, hence the D.A. So it is very obvious that that inscription in the yearbook was copied from some of the legal papers from Ms. Nelson's divorce action. Now remember, initially she said that after Moore harassed her, that she never met him again, but that's not true. He was the presiding judge in Nelson's divorce action, which she lost, by the way. She didn't get what she wanted, so this is her little bit of payback. And again, we posted the photo of the actual inscription in the yearbook, and if you look very carefully, it's obvious that starting with the word Moore, it's a different colored ink. So somebody found an inscription in the yearbook that was simply signed Roy, that sounded very romantic and flirtatious, and then they added the rest after it. Now, as you know, Gloria Allred has been asked repeatedly whether the inscription is authentic or not, and she won't answer one way or the other, which is telling you an awful lot right there. And now it's gotten even worse, because yesterday on MSNBC's MTP Daily, basically she was asked, did Nelson actually see Roy Moore sign the yearbook? And Allred said, I didn't ask. She didn't even ask her client if the client had seen Roy Moore sign the yearbook. So at this point, that whole inscription, that yearbook inscription, is down in flames. And again, if you have got real evidence of wrongdoing, if there was real evidence out there of Judge Roy Moore sexually assaulting and harassing underage girls 30 years ago, then you don't dare engage in a fraud, because if the fraud is discovered, as has been in this case, it discredits all the other claims. And so once you detect a fraud, you know it's all fraud. Now, John McCain is still out there, even though the Senate is split almost 50-50, Democrat and GOP. He's still out there on the warpath against Judge Roy Moore, even though he knows that will give Alabama's Senate seat to a Democrat and narrow that gap to a single vote in the Senate. It's moving the Democrats one step closer to having the votes to impeach Donald Trump. And so basically McCain is double-crossing Trump. Maybe he's a sore loser because he's tried for the presidency twice and didn't get there. They all want him gone. They all want him gone because he's not part of the clique. He's not part of the club. He's not part of the narcocracy. He can't be trusted to keep cover-ups on things that need to be covered up here. We're going to do a shout-out now to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining our network. And I really... on one hand, I don't like the fact of all these sexual allegations coming on out because it is distracting from Uranium Gate, Dossier Gate, Primary Gate, and we're being conditized. But on the other hand, there's a curtain being pulled back on Washington, D.C. and what kind of people are in our government, and I think that's a good thing for the American people to see. And this may turn out to be the year of the grand disillusionment. Disillusionment in Hollywood celebrities, disillusionment in our politicians, and really come to understand these are some very scummy people for the most part. There are a few rare exceptions, like Cynthia McKinney, Ron Paul, so forth. But if you look at the number of sexual harassment claims that have been settled out of court in the Congress, and they actually posted the numbers. I think the worst year was 2006. They had something like 24. That's one every 2 weeks. They spent huge amounts of your tax money, not the Congress critters' tax money, or the Congress critters' money. The Congress critters were not required to pay the settlements to these people that they harassed. They came out of your pocket here. Now, interestingly enough, it's fun, sort of, kind of watching the difference in treatment between Judge Roy Moore, for whom there's actually no evidence supporting any of these allegations, and Al Franken, where there are photos and videos of him groping and grabbing women all over the place. And yet, CNN and NBC, they're defending Al Franken. Oh, it was nothing. He's being a comedian. It's no big deal. So, again, we're seeing that the corporate media establishment is still very liberal. They're out there to protect Democrats and liberals. They're out there to attack conservatives and Republicans. Now, Politico is out there saying that Al Franken's rush to have a hearing before the Senate Ethics Committee is a sham. It's a fraud, because the Senate Ethics Committee is a place where ethics complaints about senators go to die. And they'll say, yes, we've had a hearing, and, well, we didn't really find anything. It's the whitewash. It's where they bury these things and make them go away. So let's get away from all the sexual dalliances here, if you will, and get on back to the important scandals. And we're seeing more and more hue and cry, even within some parts of the corporate media, saying it is time to have investigations into these various scandals, such as Uranium One. Even the New York Post is out there saying the Justice Department has a duty to consider a probe of the Uranium One sale. Actually, not even consider it. There's enough evidence there to move forward with a full-blown investigation and prosecutions. Because the FBI knew there was bribery and coercion going on, and Hillary and her associates still signed off on the deal, including some people who are now working in Robert Mueller's office, trying to go after Donald Trump. There's an infinite amount more evidence regarding the Uranium Gate, Russia Gate, Dossier Gate, Primary Gate, than there is about Russian-Trump collusion. And we're starting to see more and more GOP members of Congress saying that Sessions either investigate, a full, legitimate, open investigation, or he should step down, and we need an attorney general who will actually do the job. And I still think Larry Klayman would be perfect for the job. Now, Hillary is obviously very worried about the Uranium One investigation. She's out there saying it's an abuse of power. And one of the most ridiculous claims that came on out from the liberals is that traditionally you don't go after the losers of a campaign with criminal prosecutions, and that's absolutely nonsense. Under the United States and our system, if you break the law, you're supposed to be investigated, charged, tried, and if convicted, you go to jail. There's no get-out-of-jail-free card for you just because you're a loser, Hillary. Now, the author of the Clinton Cash book, which really cranked up a lot of this public awareness about just how corrupt the Clintons are, basically says that there are tapes existing of Hillary Clinton dealing with Russia, and he says they're damning. There's evidence out there. It's starting to surface. Now, the other day, we were talking about how the secret informant that the FBI had inside the uranium deal had been named in an interview with Reuters. And basically, his name is William D. Campbell. And I kind of wondered at the time why, knowing the long history of dead bodies behind the Clintons, that he would do an interview with Reuters and go public with his name. As it turns out, it actually didn't work that way. Apparently, Reuters got the name from Jeff Sessions' Department of Justice. They leaked his name just a week before testifying against the Clinton crime family in the Uranium One hearings. And Sessions may have just gotten this man suicided. So I understand that he is in fear for his life and he needs to be taking precautions, because people who have incriminating information on the Clintons have a bad habit of dying in small plane wrecks, or in the case of Ron Brown, big plane wrecks, or winding up dead in Fort Marcy Park, being suicided, shot multiple times. Now, this FBI informant is saying that he's got videos of briefcases full of money that were being handed back and forth to facilitate the deal. And I hope he has them in a secure place, and I hope he has multiple copies of them. Because you know the Clintons' henchmen are out there hunting for this guy and his evidence, and they're loaded for bear. I wouldn't want to be carrying the life insurance on this guy right now. Meanwhile, over at Judicial Watch, they have released 109 pages of new Hillary Clinton emails from her tenure as Secretary of State, some of which are classified. Remember, there wasn't supposed to be any classified information on her email server, and everything was supposed to have been turned over to congressional investigators a long time ago, and oh, gee whiz, we forgot about that. And these documents include comments about supporting the Libyan rebels and Hamas PLO talks. But again, Hillary just was not playing by the rules. Now, again, former FBI Director James Comey tried to excuse it, saying she didn't mean to do wrong. But again, if you read Title 18, intent is not required. But they're all trying to protect her and cover up for her. Remember when she did that interview on Mother Jones, and she said, if I'm charged, terrible things will happen. She's in a position to literally blackmail the entire deep state over their links to gun running, drug running, CIA, and all the rest of it. The Clintons know where all the dead bodies are buried and how they got to be dead bodies. And Hillary, we have seen indications before that she sent out the message. If she goes down, she's going to take everybody else with her, which might be a good thing, because this government is headed toward a Soviet Union-style collapse. Now, as you know, New Jersey Senator Menendez is celebrating the fact that he's off the hook. He had a mistrial, and so far no word of a retry. And he's out there saying this was all wrong. And now he's saying that the only reason the FBI investigated him was because he's Latino. And he's out there playing the race card. I didn't do anything wrong. I wasn't corrupt. They just went after me because I'm a Latino. They're a bunch of racists over at the FBI. And talk about hypocrisy and comeuppance. Wes Goodman is a Republican state legislator for Ohio, and he routinely touts his Christian faith, and he has an anti-LGBT policy. all of that has come to an end. He's had to tender his resignation when he was caught having sex with a man in his office. So once again, we find out that what the politicians are saying is not necessarily what they're doing in their private lives. Okay, let's turn on over to the war zones, emphasis on the plural here. Once again, Russian bombers have hit targets of the Islamic State near Abu Kamal in Syria. And again, these are these long-range Tupolev 22 M3 bombers. They left an airbase in Russia, crossed Iran and Iraq, carried out a massive airstrike against facilities of Islamic State, ISIS, Daesh, ISIL, whatever they're calling themselves this week. And basically said that all the designated targets were hit. And I think they're rubbing that in response to Donald Trump's cruise missile attack against that Syrian base where most of the missiles didn't hit the target. Now, the Pentagon has announced it is staying in Syria even though ISIS is defeated. Now, the real agenda is still finding a way to get rid of Bashar al-Assad and installing a puppet regime there. But the Pentagon is saying that they have a right to stay in Syria because ISIS might come back. ISIS could come back, and we want to have our bases and everything ready to go. And, of course, Syria's not buying it. They're asking the United States to leave. In fact, they're demanding it, saying that the U.S. military presence on their soil without their permission represents a military aggression. And Russia is saying it is time for the U.S. to leave. They were never invited to be in there. But the Pentagon is saying, we're going to stay. What are you going to do? Declare war on the United States? Ha, 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 ha. Syrian diplomat calls on U.S. to stop backing culprits of chemical attacks. And they're basically talking about this back and forth over the U.S. trying to get an extension on the UN investigation into chemical weapons in Syria. And the latest report coming out basically blamed Damascus for the chemical attack, but it's now come on out. Investigators didn't even visit the site of the incident. There was no investigation. They were simply told, you're going to write a report saying that Syria was to blame for the chemical attacks on the Syrian people. And they said, yes, sir, and that's what they did. But again, the story just did not make any sense. To find out if you are being lied to, look for what should be there and isn't. And what isn't there, what was never there, is a reason for Assad to gas his own people, knowing it would open the door to a U.S. invasion when he was already winning the war. ISIS is all but gone. Syria is back under the control of the Syrian government, except for the Golan. It didn't make any sense. The story never made any sense. But if you're a loyal American, you'll believe our lies, because our lies stand for mom and apple pie and cute little puppies, and all those other people's lies are all about evil. Apparently, the Syrian army liberated quarters of Deir ez-Zor from ISIS, and they found huge warehouses with huge number of lethal weapons. We're not just talking about a few weapons and chemical weapons left around some outpost. We're talking about M16 automatic rifles, TOW anti-tank missiles, 155 millimeter U.S.-made artillery. And there were even Hummers in there, some of which were already stuffed with bombs ready to explode. If you click the link on this, you'll see a photo of everything laid out. There was enough weapons there to equip a small army, and of course that's why they were going on in there. We're not looking at this idea of just a little bit of weapons smuggling somewhere. We're talking about a major operation to supply ISIS and Al-Qaeda by the U.S. government. And by the way, that's not news. Remember, that came all out in documents brought out by Judicial Watch and the various investigations. When Hillary Clinton was Secretary of State, Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton, at the same time they were telling you ISIS and Al-Qaeda are terrorists, they were supporting them militarily. We're going to take a break for commercials, and we will be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And over in Raqqa, Syria, it is becoming very obvious that the U.S.-backed Kurdish YPG militia is not really concerned with fighting ISIS, but about capturing territory. There is still a plan to break off a part of Syria, if not Iraq, for an independent Kurdistan. So we'll see what's going to happen over there. Because at this point, from the point of view of Syria, the Kurdish militia are not allies, not when they're trying to basically cordon off chunks of the country. Now, Turkish President Erdogan has accused the U.S. of financial support to ISIS, along with all the weapons. And he went on to say the U.S. has disappointed us a lot. They said they were fighting ISIS, and what did they do? They gave ISIS a bunch of dollars. He went on to say Ankara does not want to cooperate with Washington about Africa because the United States has consistently violated the agreement. That is a real problem. The United States government is getting a reputation for just not keeping its word about anything. And that's going to make any efforts at diplomatic solutions for anything that much more difficult. Now, Israel is very nervous about this ceasefire deal in southern Syria signed last weekend between the U.S., Russia, and Jordan. And that's because, according to Israel, the deal will allow Iranian-backed forces to position themselves as close as 3.5 miles from the Israeli border in the Golan Heights. But I think what their concern is that they want to basically claim the Golan Heights for themselves permanently. They've already started selling off the oil and gas underneath it. So Israel's trying to figure out a way where they can just sort of grab it and somehow make it seem like it's the just and moral thing to do. Let's take some phone calls. Joe in Rhode Island. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Michael. Michael, I really appreciate your research, and you're well read, and I really appreciate your investigations. I'd like to ask you a favor, though.
What?
John Podesta, who was the Democratic man in charge during the elections, he was on WikiLeaks, a tape that they had, and it was to do with talking to two Democratic operatives about an organization. They wanted to start an organization to undermine the Christian churches, especially the Catholic Church and the evangelicals around the country.
Mm-hmm.
They wanted to undermine them. And John Podesta said on the tape, he says, we already have 3 or 4 organizations doing that. I was wondering, Michael, could you find out the names of those organizations?
Well, I'll take a look.
I would really appreciate that.
I'll try and take a look at that, but from the Democrats' point of view, the Republican Party gets a lot of support from the Christian community, those who are not Christian Zionists, of course, and finding a way to disrupt the religion would undermine some of that support for the GOP.
I would love to know what organizations those are, because I'll tell you this, Mike. I'm a Christian. I'm 70 years old now,
mm-hmm.
and I've been a Christian all my life. And I've always wondered if there was government intervention in the churches in our country.
Well, yes. I
could never prove it. And here we have it on tape.
Well,
there is government intervention in the churches.
Well, the government uses the churches to keep people basically where they are. Render unto Caesar that which is Caesar's, and so forth and so on. But especially, remember Bush's faith-based initiatives, where along with their tax-free status, churches were getting huge chunks of tax money to carry out social programs that normally would have been handled by the civilian sector. And so, governments throughout history have relied on religion to help mold the opinion of the general public. In the age of TV and radio and newspapers, their influence isn't as great as it once was, but it's still a major force for propaganda. Anyway, Joe, we're going to have to let you go. We've got to take a break for commercials, and we'll be right back.
See what you can do, Mike.
I'll do my best. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, and we're going to go back to the phones here. Dustin in New Jersey. Aloha. Welcome back to the show. What's on your mind today?
Hi, Mike. Hey, Mike, what was the name of that airline bringing the CIA weapons from, what was it, Ramstein to, to Turkey? Or no, Bulgaria. Remember that investigative reporter?
Evergreen, I think it was. That's one of the CIA's proprietary airlines. Evergreen Air.
They have like, it's like a laundry list of fronts and, company. I mean, it's amazing. Like A to Z, it's like, I mean, it's unreal, Mike. Like, I mean, there's so many intricate webs to this, to them, and they're unstoppable. I mean,
well, they're actually very stoppable. I mean, Congress and the president can basically say we're going to shut you down. Of course, the last president who tried to do that, wound up shot dead in Dealey Plaza. I mean, the CIA has a lot of proprietary companies that they own outright, or they have associations with other companies. Remember, Brewster Jennings Associates was the one that Valerie Plame worked for, and when she got outed as a CIA asset, it blew the cover off of Brewster Jennings Associates, which was actually the CIA's main facility for tracking third world attempts to obtain nuclear weapons. And so when they went after Valerie Plame to discredit her husband over his discrediting of the Yellow Cake claim in Iraq, they literally destroyed, at least for a short while, the U.S. ability to find out just who was trading nuclear weapons around the world. And we know it's a problem because, of course, paperwork exists showing that Israel was trying to sell a nuclear weapon to the former government of South Africa.
Wasn't it Dick Cheney who outed her?
Yes, I think that's right.
Yeah, see, like these people, your usefulness is up to a certain point, and, they'll just discard you like you're just garbage. Like, I mean, it's a joke, Mike. Like, how can anybody support? I mean, I'm not saying like the underlings of the CIA, they do their job, but you got those sections, the good old boy sections, like that sections of the team players per se that, I mean, like I said, when Trump come in, I mean, I feel sorry for the smaller group, but they should have brought in Ray McGovern. I know you talked about this for William Benny for the NSA. He can still do that.
Yes.
I mean, there's people there that know the system because you need somebody who knows the system. You just can't bring in Joe Schmo off the docks at the fishery, I mean, you got to have somebody who knows the inner workings.
See, unfortunately, those plum positions at the top of these agencies are usually given to, campaign supporters and campaign donors who may or may not know what they're doing with that job. And very often at the top levels of our government, decisions are made without really evaluating their potential consequences downstream. And the outing of Valerie Plame was a good example. They wanted to discredit her and discredit her husband to protect the lie that Saddam was building nuclear weapons. And apparently nobody even stopped to consider that it might actually damage Brewster Jennings and the U.S. ability to track third world nuclear weapons. It just didn't occur to them. I've pointed out many times over the last several years where decisions are being made and clearly nobody is really doing an analysis on the potential blowbacks or the downsides of any of this stuff. They just get an idea in their head and it sounds really good and they say, that's what we're going to do. It's policy. Let's move forward.
Mike, I want to switch gears to Trump.
Yes.
I know we talk about this. I call in about all the time about the tax plan. And I know people love Trump still. I mean, I voted for him. I'm a Democrat. I said that before. And, I like him still, but I don't like him because remember when he ran in the debates, he said, like, basically dumb people pay taxes. He knows he has, he paid certain politicians off to do favors. He said that, and we know that. And, that's business as usual. But, with the Paradise Papers coming out and stuff like that, and, with the tax plan, it just aggravates me, Mike, how, these people, it just seems like they're always going to get a break and everybody else is going to get the shaft. I mean, it says like people who make over $600,000 is going to get 8% less paying taxes, but people who make less than that is 1.5%. But then you take away the deductions for, the local and state taxes. Most people are going to be paying more. I hate to tell you that. And, Trump's going to be saving $31 million here, another $71 million here. And why didn't they just do the $1.2 billion tax cut for the middle class and leave the corporate tax rate as it is, because they have the paradise of, all those islands and Scotland and Ireland, what they call it, the double hop skip, whatever they call it. They have all these loopholes. They're not even stopping, Mike. We're getting the shaft again. I mean,
yeah, we are.
How many more times can people?
Well, again, every oppressive regime, every tyranny in history has made a point of destroying the middle class, because it is from the middle class that opposition to oligarchy arises. And we're seeing it happen here. The Soviet Union lasted for as long as it did because they designed a system that simply didn't have a middle class to begin with. There was the vast proletariat, and then there were the elites. And they supposedly to pave the way for the classless society, they built the most powerful ruling class in all of history. They even outdid the Tsars toward the end there in terms of their absolute power. But the poor are made to pay for everything, and the rich are always going to buy themselves special favors and loopholes because politicians as a class would sell their own mother for $1. And that is unfortunately a sad commentary on our current system. One of the reasons why the tax code is as huge and obfuscated as it is it represents an accumulation of decade after decade after decade of special favors given to certain industries, certain businesses in exchange for campaign donations. And most people can be forgiven for not having looked at the tax code. And it really is a mess, and it should be simplified, but then all the special favors and loopholes go away, and the money junkies are never going to allow that.
But you know what the scam, Mike, Sean Hannity, all those guys they have on about the tax plan on Fox News, you notice they keep saying it's about growth. So basically, oh yeah, you'll be paying more taxes, but you know what? It's about growth. It might help you, but if it don't, guess what? The corporate tax rate still stays at 20. 10 years later,
well,
your taxes are going to go up even more.
Wait a minute. You need to understand something about growth of the economy. Because when you have a private central bank that creates the public currency out of thin air and loans it into circulation, when they talk about growth, what they really mean is the growth in the total indebtedness of the nation, which is good for them and bad for us. They use the word growth because it sounds positive. But the reality is a growing economy means growing debt that must be serviced down the road somewhere.
Yeah, that's why I'm not an expert, and I do a lot of research, but I'm not like an economic expert. But I mean, if the whole thing is, if the consumer, the consumption, those who consume the most should get the most tax cut because they go out and stimulate the economy by buying stuff. That creates jobs.
You're absolutely right. You're absolutely right, and it is amazing that our financial planners and experts in Wall Street and Washington, D.C. don't understand that the reason the economy is grinding to a halt is because the vast majority of the American people, the consumers, don't have the money to pour back into the system, to go to the malls and buy stuff. We're looking at another disastrous Christmas season. We're seeing iconic retailers are starting to fall left and right. But the money junkies, because they are money junkies, because they are in the throes of a real psychological addiction, they cannot see anything beyond getting that next money fix. They really are very ill people.
Mike, having Goldman Sachs do your tax plan is having Count Dracula watch over the blood bank.
Or like having
Thanks,
the health insurance companies write the Affordable Care Act. So forth and so on. All right, we're going to go to Al in Canada. Aloha, Al. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike.
Hi, you're on the air.
The U.S. Corp. Hi, can you hear me?
You're on the air.
Hello?
You are on the air.
Oh, okay, yeah. So, Mike, the U.S. corporate tax rate is one of the highest in the world. And there's trillions of dollars overseas that could be brought back home if that tax rate was lowered. I think it's at nearly 40% this year. So, a corporate tax rate and taxing people that actually work in that corporation are two totally different things. Because there are stockholders and whatnot, and they put up a certain amount of cash and they expect a certain return to dividend. So
there's a little bit of a problem with that. there's a little bit of a problem with that. If the corporate tax rate is lowered to match the rest of the world, that is not an incentive for these corporations to go through the trouble and expense of bringing their operations back to the United States of America. And when you look at our deteriorated infrastructure that is needed to support industry and agriculture, when you look at the educational level of the average American worker, there really isn't much of anything to work with in terms of rebuilding the factories and getting us back on our feet again. So I'm afraid the cut in corporate tax rate is actually too little. It's more of a giveaway. And every time the corporations get a gift, they just put it in their own pocket. We have not seen a significant amount of investment activity on a large scale in this country that would allow us to get some of those 94 million Americans who've been out of work for months and years back onto the job.
Yeah, that is true. But, at the same time, I mean, you got to start somewhere. If the United States has, and I'm not saying that corporations do pay that 39%. There are a lot of loopholes, and we know that.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, the same thing applies up here in Canada. I think our corporate tax rate is 15%. I mean, we're no better off than the United States. A lot of jobs have been lost up here. I saw it with my own eyes. I live in a city where the industry, like high-paying, good-paying manufacturing jobs have, almost disappeared. All that's left are, technical service jobs in food plants and whatnot, mill writing, which I am, and electricians and stuff like that. But, I mean, I don't think it would hurt. I don't think it could hurt any more the people of the United States to have the corporate tax rate lowered. I mean, you never know.
I don't think it's going to help the American people.
I mean, Apple brought.
I don't think it's going to turn. I mean, there have been, Trump has gotten some companies to say we're going to bring jobs back to the United States of America, but it's more symbolism. Because the number of jobs they're talking about is just, minuscule compared to the number of unemployed Americans. What we really need in order to rebuild our industry is to, first of all, we got to get our infrastructure back together, and we have got to start coming up with new ideas for new products and industries that other countries can't yet make. Because the reason these corporations have gone to these other countries is because the U.S. just gave away the crown jewels of our technology. If you go back and you look at the tech boom of the 70s, 80s, and 90s, all of that came out of the Apollo missions to the moon and figuring out how to get to the moon. It was new materials, new structures, microchips, all of that stuff came out of that. And then because we had a managerial class that was not in love with the actual idea of manufacturing, thank you, Harvard Business School, they simply said, we'll license the technology to these other countries where they can make it a lot cheaper. When Seymour Cray was designing the last round of supercomputers before he passed away, he couldn't find a single American company who could fabricate the chips he needed. He had to go direct to Japan to get them.
Yeah, well, and Japan, I mean, the only reason they got built up is because they stole the American technology and
they didn't
stuff
steal
they were putting
it.
out when they first started manufacturing was garbage.
Al, they didn't steal it. It was licensed to them. It was shared with them. And
you know what? I'm not really saying stealing, though. You know what I mean? It's they basically,
Well, once they have the technology, they're going to copy it off here. You need to go find yourself.
Oh, yeah.
You need to find a book called Airframe, and it's by Michael Crichton, and it's about the aviation industry, and it's about globalism. And the story basically involves this aircraft manufacturing company, and it's being taken over by these globalist hotshots who are trying to make deals with these other countries for airplanes. And part of the deal is they get to basically manufacture the wings for themselves. And, of course, that is good for the short term and the stock options and the rest of it, but that technology transfer means that in a few years, those countries are going to be able to make their own wing structures for their own aircraft. And so when you have invested huge amounts of money in developing a technological advantage over another country, you have to keep it close to your chest. And you have to keep those jobs that use that technology to make products in this country. The instant you start offshoring all of that, you've lost that technological advantage. You've thrown it away, basically, is what happened. And again,
your country is in decline.
Yeah, that's where, right. And it's been in decline
what happens.
For 30 years.
Could you put that up on your website, Mike?
Which part?
That book and that book and that author?
Well, it's Michael Crichton. I'm sure you've heard of him. He did Jurassic Park and the others. This is one of his lesser-known books. It's called simply Airframe. It'll never be made into a movie, I guarantee you. But, toward the end of his career, Michael Crichton, he had enough money. He wasn't really interested in getting any more. And his last series of books, he was trying to sound a warning about what he saw as dangerous directions in society. And Airframe was one of them, about globalism, State of Fear, about the global warming hoax. And it's really good stuff. And it's, you can go down to
like Aaron Russo.
Yeah, absolutely. You reach a point in your life where, you don't have a lot of life left, and you've got enough money to be comfortable. You're not a money addict, and you start using whatever skills and art that you have to try and get the message out there. George Carlin was another one toward the end of his career. He was going to say what he thought people needed to hear. He'd make it funny so people would listen, but he was out there saying what he thought people needed to hear. And he didn't care if anybody got upset about it. And that was one of the things that I think made him truly great.
Yeah, and it was an eye-opener, too.
Yes.
It's really an eye-opener, the stuff that came out of that guy's mouth, in the last decade and a half that he was alive.
Yes.
Thanks a lot for your time, Mike. I appreciate it.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go. We do have another caller waiting on the line, but we're about ready to take a commercial break, so I'm going to put that on hold until we come back from these words from our sponsors. And then we're going to get back to the news about the war zones. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. We're going to take a phone call from Peter in Los Angeles. Aloha, Peter. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, hi, Mike. I was listening to your conversation with Dustin. I actually have two topics, but the more important one is what you guys started talking about, and that's how extensive the CIA and the intelligence community and how nobody knows exactly just how damn big they are. I mean, their budget is black. It's classified. And then only a few congressmen and senators have an idea of what their published classified for them is. And then you add on the drug trade, the drug smuggling, the arms trade, the arms smuggling, the front businesses they've set up, like you were saying, Brewster Jennings and others, and media outlets like that they're wholly owned, and blackmail and shakedown because they've got surveillance and all that stuff that they can shake people down. Then they've got murder for hire. Believe me, that happens as well.
Yes.
Then you add in the fact that they outsource a whole lot of this stuff to contractors, and it's pervasive.
Well,
it's everywhere. It's like a huge.
The contractors are to maintain deniability, and they can say, "Oh no, we didn't know about any of that stuff going on." And you're right. The CIA does conduct a lot of off-the-books missions or projects, if you will, that Congress has no idea about. Congress had no idea about Operation Screw Worm out of Arkansas in the 1980s because it was illegal under the Boland Amendment and the Logan Act, and that's why the CIA was funding it all with cocaine smuggled into this country. In a lot of ways, they act like the mafia, and apparently throughout much of our history, the CIA and the mafia have actually worked together on certain projects. You had Jack Ruby, for example, was not only CIA, he was a mafia paymaster. So they think of it as the mafia wrapped in a flag, and that's probably a pretty accurate summation of the CIA.
And I know you know that Ruby worked for the Un-American Activities thing with Nixon, but he also was an arms smuggler to Israel.
Yes.
For the War of Independence. But the other thing I wanted to talk to, which is related to that, was the UN article on Rahm Emanuel and Amman Imran.
Yes, I saw that.
And how he helped spring Amman Imran from Pakistan. And wanted to point out a couple of things. That for years it's been pretty much a given, honestly, by intelligence guys, that Rahm Emanuel, who, by the way, during the Gulf War, when we were at war, the Persian Gulf War, Desert Storm, he went over to Israel and put on an Israeli uniform.
Yes.
His father was an Israeli guy for the Irgun or something like that. and a terrorist for the Irgun. But
well,
at any rate, he is an Israeli spy.
Yeah, I was just going to say, he is suspected of being Mega, which was Israel's most highly placed spy in the Clinton White House. And that may be why Imran Awan was, as returned for getting out of Pakistan, spying on all the House members' computers, and which means that information went to Israel. All right, we got to take a break for station identification. Thank you for the call, Peter. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 2. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443, and we're going to go ahead and take a phone call right now. Kevin in West Virginia, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mr. Mike. All these sexual allegations and all this sexual scandal and everything, a part of me wants to say this is nothing more than a diversion away from the narcocracy and Uranium One and Dossier Gate and all this other crap. How can we keep the picture and the focus on the narcocracy and on Uranium One and not let the mainstream and not let that get away from, the forefront of everybody's mind?
By talking to your friends and family, by emailing people and saying, don't be distracted by this, because the fact of the matter is, again, Congress actually released a list of all the sexual harassment and assaults and all the money they've been paying for like the last 20 years. So this stuff is going on all the time. Only when it becomes useful as a political weapon does it make its way into the corporate media. And you're right, we're being conditized with this. But the corporate media is just going to follow their instructions to keep trying and distract the American people with these tawdry little sex scandals. But it's up to us. It's up to the Rivero's Rangers to keep these topics alive on social media, our mailing lists, and just talking with ordinary people every day, and just say, behind all of this, things are being hidden from you. They're trying to distract you with sex so you're not paying attention to things like the Uranium One sale. The fact that last year's primary definitely was rigged against Bernie Sanders, and this dossier for Donald Trump was paid for by the Clinton campaign, was never verified. They didn't even try to verify it before they leaked it on out to the media.
Yeah, and I don't know if you had seen yesterday with Hillary, maybe it wasn't yesterday, but Hillary and the mainstream media was saying, oh, if you launch an investigation into Hillary, this is authoritarian. This is a dictatorship. Well, didn't they launch an investigation into Trump over some messed up allegations that not even, it's like, wait a minute, what planet are you on?
Well, Hillary is definitely hitting the hysterics button here to make comments like that, along with that one to Mother Jones about if I'm charged, terrible things will happen. But it's clear to me that she's feeling the pressure. And she's starting to realize that maybe for the first time in the long history of the Clintons, they're not going to be able to get away with this stuff. And all it's going to take is one crack in the facade, and it's all going to come spilling on out. All the way back to Vince Foster.
You said it before. Yep, you said it before. She goes down, she's going to drag people down with her.
Yep.
Let it so be. Let her
agree.
Spill the guts.
I agree. Absolutely agree.
Well, you have a great and wonderful day. That was just my question and my comment, and I hope the more every day goes by, the more bizarre it gets.
Isn't it?
Al Franken calling in an ethical review on himself. Like, really? Wow.
He didn't really.
That's all I gotta say.
He didn't really call for it. He just said he was perfectly happy that they were going to do that. But again, the Senate Ethics Committee is where scandals go to be buried and never seen again. All right. Well, thank you for the phone call. We're going to let you go. Getting on back here to the war zones. Obviously, things in Saudi Arabia are moving forward rapidly, and the thing is that Saudi Arabia is dealing with some issues. They're dealing with an economy that got destroyed by that oil price war with Russia. Saudi Arabia is trying to deal with the reality that they may be running out of easily reachable oil to sell. And so there's sort of a finite timeline of the wealth continuing to pour on in. So it looks like Saudi Arabia is trying to position itself as a regional power, and they could ignite a region-wide conflict in the process. Now, a lot of people are scratching their head about why Israel and Saudi Arabia are working together, and a lot of people have been at pains to remind me that the Saudi royal family actually has links back to Israel. But what's really going on here is Saudi Arabia's got huge amounts of money, or they had huge amounts of money, and they know how to use it. But their military has never been all that effective. I mean, if you look at how long they've been stuck in Yemen and not able to make any progress other than inflicting humanitarian harm on the civil population, they need a powerful, well-trained military, and that may be why Crown Prince bin Salman is making overtures to partner with Israel. Because Saudi Arabia would like to have a war against Lebanon, but they want Israel's military to do it for them. So that's kind of what's going on over there. Strange alliances, as it were. Speaking of Lebanon, Lebanon is reporting that they are now dealing with a lot of pressure and intimidation efforts to get them to cancel the gas deal they've made with Russia. And basically trying to force Lebanon to give up this joint gas project with Russia. And it says there's this anti-Lebanon, anti-Russia campaign underway. And, of course, the oil and gas is a big issue behind all these wars. The U.S. wants all control of the oil and gas, or at least what currency it's sold for. And if Lebanon is going to be developing oil and gas with Russia, you can bet that that oil and gas is going to be sold for either Lebanon's own native currency or for the Russian ruble. And remember, it's having all of the world's resource-rich areas shackled to the dollar that is the penultimate agenda behind all this warmongering. We're going to do a shout-out now to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining our network. Iraq forces have liberated the last ISIS-held town, Rawa, near the Syrian border. So ISIS really is pretty much done and gone, except for all those ISIS officers and fighters that were evacuated from Syria by the United States. We don't know where they're being sent to, but I don't think they're being given retirement plans or anything like that. I think probably a lot of them are going to show up in the next countries that the U.S. wants to invade. Remember, they dropped some of them into the Philippines, and the Philippine military got rid of them, possibly with the help of China. We know they're now screaming that ISIS is showing up in Afghanistan to justify the escalation of troops and support into there. But it's becoming a recognizable pattern. Any country the United States wants to invade, they drop ISIS in there first and say, oh, ISIS, war on terror, we can come on in and bomb your country. The State Department has now issued a new assessment on Russia, calling it a threat from the Baltic to the Black Sea. And it's just more of this war propaganda. And apparently they're concerned that Russia has shown the ability to conduct and prepare large-scale exercises, such as the recent West 2017 exercises. And yeah, it is demonstrating a capability to deploy and coordinate large numbers of forces and to do so efficiently. But again, Russia is not the aggressor here. I keep hitting this point over and over again. You don't see Russian weapons on the northern side of our border with Canada or the southern side of our border with Mexico. You don't see Russian aircraft carriers sailing around in the Gulf of Mexico or off the coast of California. The last time there were Russian warships sailing off the coast of America was when Russia sided with the Union against the Confederacy and kept Europe from attacking the United States on behalf of the Confederacy. A little bit of history some of you may not have known here. Now, you know, there's this big NATO drill that they're getting ready to do here. And all of a sudden, Turkey pulled out of it because apparently looking at the maps for the war games, Erdogan's name was used on the enemy chart. And I can understand why Erdogan might be just a little upset over that, so they have now pulled on out. And that puts the possibility of Turkey being a part of NATO very much in doubt. Over in Korea, despite all the talk about our wonderful THAAD system and Patriot and everything else that's going on, the reality is that experts in military hardware are saying it's actually going to be very difficult to intercept and down North Korean missiles. And so the U.S. is embarking on a new program. They got an emergency funding request to Congress, trying to find new ways to bring down these missiles like cyber weapons and armed drones. Now, the problem with the cyber weapons is unless you're able to hack into the missile software at its point of manufacture, it's not like these missiles are on the internet. They don't have communication with the outside when they're being used for their primary purpose. During tests, yeah, there are radio links, telemetry, all kinds of things. Some missiles, some advanced missiles, do have radio links. They can be retargeted in the middle of a flight. I think some of the more advanced standards have that capacity in case one missile gets a target and they decide, well, we've got an extra missile, let's send it over here. But for the most part, I don't think North Korea's missiles are going to have any kind of a radio or link that can be hacked into while it's in flight. Trump is apparently talking about adding North Korea to the list of state sponsors of terror next week, and that list has really become a joke because there are so many nations that are on that list that haven't actually been caught engaging in acts of terror. But apparently this is a move to try and outrage North Korea and try and goad them into doing something. But right now, Kim Jong-un is playing it very, very cool. He has not tested any more nuclear weapons. He has not tested any more long-range missiles. He's just sitting still and waiting for the U.S. to burn itself out on the rhetoric. Now, getting on down to Africa, apparently the U.S. now has significantly more troops in Somalia. They've got some 500 troops on the ground. They're denying there's a buildup of forces in the African country. Last time we were in Somalia, didn't really work all that well, if you've ever seen the movie Black Hawk Down. And finally, down in Argentina, apparently one of their military submarines is missing at sea in the South Atlantic. Apparently it last radioed its position 2 days ago, and so now they've launched a massive search for it. They're hoping it's simply a communication problem. And I am not hopeful, because submarines have more than one radio, even the Argentine submarines. And sometimes they simply vanish after a communication report. That's what happened with the USS Scorpion. When it was coming across the Atlantic, it filed a location report, was never heard from again. And everybody was standing at the docks in the U.S. waiting for the sub to come on in, and it just never came on in. Finally, they were able to locate it, and Bob Ballard actually surveyed the wreckage of the Scorpion and the Thresher as part of the clandestine component of his mission to find the Titanic. A lot of people don't know this, but Ballard was in the Navy, and he was reactivated, and they used the search for the Titanic as a cover story for the missions to go on out and look for the Scorpion and the Thresher and put to rest these hysterical claims that Russia had sunk both of these submarines. In the case of the Scorpion, it was pretty much figured out that there was a defective torpedo battery that could actually activate while the torpedo was still in the submarine, and it would overheat because it didn't have the ocean water flowing by it to cool it, and could lead to a cook-off of the warhead. And in the case of the Thresher, they tried to save a little bit of money by brazing some of the pipe joints instead of outright welds, and one of the brazed joints cut loose, and it sprayed water all over the two electric control panels, which were imprudently located side by side. And so that's what happened to that one. And Ballard sort of figured all of that out. And I actually lost a cousin on the Thresher. So kind of a sensitive issue. And I hope they find these submariners. And I got to tell you, I have a lot of respect for submariners. For anybody who's going to lock themselves in that metal tube, and you would never, ever get me in one of those. I mean, I've been on the tour submarines off the coast here to go down and look at the shipwrecks and everything. But a combat submarine, no, that would not be my idea of fun. So let's talk about the economic news here. And as you know, we're less than a week away from Thanksgiving. There's going to be the Thanksgiving holiday and Black Friday and the start of the holiday shopping season. And actually, Claire and I, we already got most of ours done. Not that we had much of a budget, but we had to buy the stuff for the children at the local Toys R Us because we don't know when they're going to close. And they're already starting to run out of stuff because a lot of their suppliers are not sending any more inventory out of concern that they're not going to get paid. So we had to get that out of the way. But there's a very disturbing article out of CNBC on how an alarming number of American shoppers are still paying off the debts from last Christmas. You go on, if you're a good Christian and you're a good holiday spirit and you love your family, you'll max out the plastic and buy those Hickory Farms boxes of preservative-loaded cheese and meat or whatever it is you're going to be doing this year. And that's really kind of a terrible way to be doing that. I mean, you can get in a situation where you're going to be paying off the debt on something that you bought long after the item that you bought has burned out, worn out, and been thrown away. And that really isn't the way to go. Stick to cash, have a budget. 27% of people surveyed in this study admit they don't have a budget. They just grab all the money and grab all the plastic and they go to the malls and they get a rush just, for once in the year being able to just buy whatever you get an impulse to buy. And it is a rush, I'll admit that. But you got to be very, very careful because Christmas, as it's handled in this country, in fact, all the holidays, Halloween, Thanksgiving, Christmas, Easter, it's just marketing and marketing and marketing. And I learned that many, many years ago when I was working on a film project in Munich, Germany, and I got to experience Christmas at the Marienplatz. And I'm sure today, with all the refugees and everything that's gone on in, that wonderful romantic feeling may not be there anymore. But it really felt like I had always thought Christmas was supposed to be, based on what I read in books, as opposed to this, it's Christmas time, buy, 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 buy. Remember Tom Lair's Christmas Carol? You got to hunt that one down. It's on YouTube. Getting on back to Toys R Us, even though they are in bankruptcy, Toys R Us has asked the bankruptcy court for permission to pay $16 million in bonuses to its top executives, assuming that they can hit some financial targets during the upcoming holiday shopping season. So they're literally betting that they're going to make a bunch of money over Christmas, and they probably will get a surge. The problem is too many retailers literally bet their entire year on that holiday shopping season. They expect to make 1/3 of their money in that last month of the year. And it's been falling short for the last several years now because people just don't have a lot of money. And more people very wisely and prudently don't want to go to those credit cards with the high interest rates. So we'll see what happens there. Now, article over an Investment Watch blog, Fed admits negative interest rates must be implemented by all central banks to prevent collapse. In other words, they're going to pay you to borrow the money. And I imagine that's going to be very attractive for people on Wall Street so that they can play with the stock market some more. But I think for ordinary people like you and I, we don't want to borrow money. We're not sure we can pay it back. And that's the difference between Wall Street, Washington, D.C.'s axis of greed, and the rest of us. Washington will borrow money like crazy, so will Wall Street. Ordinary people, we don't want to borrow any more money. If we're not sure we can pay it back, we don't want to borrow. And that really is a better way to think about it. Now, Volkswagen has announced they're going to make a big push into electric cars. They're going to invest around $40 billion with a B over the next 5 years to develop new electric vehicles, self-driving cars, and an Uber-like mobility app services. And they're even talking about robot taxi services. So they're making a big push to develop some new technologies that are going to be out there. And it will be interesting to see if it works and if they can make it work. It may help the revolution. Remember, there have been some breakthroughs now in the lithium batteries used to power electric cars where they won't explode on you and they're much, much, much faster to charge. And that was the last major roadblock to the electric car, was the charging time. We're going to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And getting on over to Europe and the refugee crisis, according to the World Economic Forum Global Agenda Council on Migration, according to the chairman, Dr. Khalid Koser, MBE, mass Muslim migration makes Europe more secure. And I don't know what drugs he's on, because Europe is not more secure. There's been skyrocketing rates of rape, gang violence, crime in general. It's not secure at all. This guy saying so won't make it so. Another place that the refugee policy has backfired is Germany, because their homeless population is exploding. And they basically had a one-third growth of people living rough in the last 2 years. Something like today, in 2017, something like 65, 70,000 people living on the German streets. When I was in Germany, you just didn't see that. One of the big problems that's happening all across Europe and even here in America is this huge influx of the refugees is causing a housing shortage, which is driving up rents and housing prices. Now, there was a roundup of the MS-13 gang members here in the United States. And MS-13, though, these are bad hombres. They're running drugs. They have a big thing for tattoos all over their bodies like the Yakuza did. And just do a web search on MS-13 and you'll see what these people are like. Apparently, 1/3 of all of these arrested MS-13 gangsters were invited into the United States by President Barack Obama's unaccompanied alien children policy. And remember, even when it was going on, they were saying, these aren't children. You know, these are adult men coming into this program, and they're gang members. Maybe they're working with the CIA to sell the CIA's cocaine and heroin on the streets. Now, apparently, in Great Britain, new migrants have made up 90% of new households over the past decade. That's how much they're pouring on in. Now, over in France, Macron is blaming the rise of Islamic radicalism because the French Republic has resigned. And he's basically saying that it's really the fault of France that this is happening. That if France was being French, the Muslims would come on in and there wouldn't be any problems. They're really starting to grasp at straws, trying to negate the negative impact of this open borders policy. Now, over in Great Britain, Theresa May, who has now backed off her claims that Russia caused Brexit and so forth and so on, is now asking the EU to respond positively to her current proposals for the Brexit. And meanwhile, much of her opposition is saying there shouldn't be a deal. There shouldn't be a divorce payment. There's nothing about that in the EU charter. Let's just leave. Meanwhile, Ireland is saying that they will block progress on the Brexit negotiations with the EU unless Great Britain gives a formal written guarantee that there will be no hard border between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland. So that's another wild card factor out there as well. Story coming on out from the Truth News. EU elite planning to blame the coming financial crisis on Brexit. We didn't mismanage, the money. It's not the fault of the private central bank. It's Brexit. Brexit has caused the global crash. It's all their fault, those people who voted for Brexit. Go hate them. Don't hate us. Hate them. We're going to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. Rather interesting little story that appeared in the Daily Sheeple, where apparently over in Sweden there's a social media campaign pressuring Sweden to adopt a Turkish-style flag due to Islam's rapid growth in the country. And there's a petition out there asking Sweden's prime minister to do away with the current offensive flag. Now, I got an email from somebody who says that actually take the story with a grain of salt. It's not getting that much support over there. But again, it underscores that the current open borders migrants do not want to assimilate into their new homes, which has normally been the pattern for much of history. When you go to another country, you learn their language, you learn their laws, you learn their customs. You know, in your own home, you can be what you were in your old country, use your old language. Teddy Roosevelt said it perfectly. If you want to come to the United States of America, you're welcome, but understand this is the United States of America. We have a language here, English. We have laws that must be obeyed. All right, let's take a phone call. Clay in Alabama, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Well, about Judge Moore.
Yes?
You know, he may not be an angel, but I predict he's going to win by shocking landslide.
Yeah.
In large part because the Republican Party has turned against him. That they've cut off the financing, and they're even threatening not to let him be seated if he wins.
And
so I think the Republicans have shot themselves in the foot more than they've hurt Roy Moore.
I would tend to agree because, especially with this yearbook signature now discredited, and as I said before, if you have real evidence that Moore did these things 30 years ago, you don't dare put something faked in there, because if it's discovered, it will discredit everything else. So if we've got fakery and fraud here with this yearbook signature, then it means basically everything that was being hurled at Moore was a fraud. And remember, they tried exactly the same thing with Donald Trump, and it didn't work. And I think the people of Alabama are probably recognizing that this is a classic political smear job, precisely because it was used against Donald Trump. And I think you're probably right. Unless there's massive election fraud, I think Moore is going to win. And if the Senate refuses to seat him, you're right. The GOP is shooting itself in the foot. And that means a Democratic Congress next year.
Well, let's hope not. But I think this whole deal, the whole government is putting smut on its own face more than the people they're attacking. I think a mistake they're making is I think every average American is just stupid, or they wouldn't be an average American. You know, that they'd be in government or be a billionaire or something. I think they've just misjudged big time.
I think they really have, and again, it's because so many of them have been playing the game this way for all their lives, and they don't understand the environment has changed around them. The general population are skeptical. They don't trust politicians as a class now. And people have a natural sympathy for somebody that they see is definitely being a victim of nefarious actions. And Moore is an outside. And what's really amazing is to see all these Republicans with the balance between GOP and Democrats in the Senate so close, they're willing to give away a Senate seat to a Democrat just to not have Judge Roy Moore in the chamber. And you have to wonder what's going on. What engendered that kind of hate? Is this simply Mitch McConnell's revenge? Even McCain is out there. And the net result is they're reducing their own power in the Senate.
Well, they're exposing themselves for what they are.
Yes.
And it's not just Republicans. It's not just Democrats. That whole crowd up there, they're a little group. They feel like anybody outside their circle is insignificant and stupid. Because if they weren't stupid, they'd be inside their circle. So I think.
Well, I think it has more to do with the corruption. If you're willing to be corrupt, you're inside our club. If you have these antiquated ideas of morality and ethics, we don't want you around here because you're going to spoil the party. I mean, the moral and the immoral are mutually exclusive societies. Neither one tolerates the presence of the other. And that means once a government starts to go corrupt, it's very quickly going to go all the way corrupt.
Well, it seems to me, if you study history a little bit, in the end, eventually, all governments fall to corruption, fail because of corruption.
Yes.
Oftentimes, sometimes they get overrun by a powerful enemy, more powerful enemy, which is more powerful because their government is so corrupt. I mean,
we saw that with Rome.
It can't even defend its country anymore.
We saw it with Rome. We saw it with the former Soviet Union.
I think we're close to that. I sure do. Thank you for taking my call.
You got it. And get out there and vote for Roy Moore on Election Day. Thank you for the phone call. We're going to switch over to Lenny in Los Angeles. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yes, Mike, I would like to speak to what you said before the caller from Alabama called in about the Swedes and the pushing of an Islamic flag in the country of Sweden. And you said that it underscores, you know, the thinking of some people when they enter other people's country. I beg to differ. It underscores the non-thinking of the Swedes and the fact that it is their country and it just may be worth fighting for. Okay? And also pertaining to as far as the people who are pushing the so-called Islamic flag and making the Swedes feel guilty about it, I guarantee you they're not Islamic at all. I guarantee you it's that band of people who are looking to miscegenate Europe. And they're not Islamic. There's the so-called Muslims are nothing but the scapegoat of these people's doing.
Well, again, we did get a reader's email saying that the reality is that this is not going to go anywhere, that the Swedish people are not sympathetic to this idea at all. But again, we're seeing all these indications of an agenda to try and erase our sense of national identity or regional cultural history, and look at that situation that happened over in Poland, where they had 60,000 people marched in a nationalism rally. And it was being denounced all over the world. Oh, what do you mean nationalism? Oh, you shouldn't be thinking that way at all. We had that story a few days ago where John McCain was addressing the cadets at one of the military academies, and he's literally up there saying, "Don't make America great. Don't put America first. You've got to start thinking about how we're going to merge with Europe and everything." And so they're pushing this whole globalist New World Order idea. And the people are starting to push on back because they look at what's happened in the European Union and realize that it is a raw deal, that it means a lowered standard of living, less security at home, and along with all this political correctness that you can't say or do anything that might offend any of the dozen or so new ethnic groups that are now in your neighborhood.
Yeah, and like I said, the reason these ethnic groups are stuck there, the same reason the blacks, whites, Mexican, Asian here in America are being put at each other's throats. The band of thieves know who they are. They've stolen everything and can't steal no more, and they're afraid that the people are going to come after them. The Swedes wouldn't be any different. Okay, so what I'm saying is that if you look at the lowest form of animal, you cannot use one form of animal or mammal to miscegenate another one. They have sense enough to know this. The only ones who can be convinced of this is the so-called human being.
Well, yeah, you're right, and again, it's divide and conquer. The reason our government is trying to turn blacks against white. Same reason back in the 1960s, to prevent us from uniting against the real threat to our way of life, which is that federal government.
Right. Right. Let me just say this. I know how it's going to come out and it's going to offend some people, but I'm with the polls all the way.
Yes, me too.
Thank you very much.
Me too. I absolutely agree with you. Thank you for the phone call. We're going to let you go. Now, turning to Germany, Angela Merkel has missed her own deadline to form a coalition government. It's been 2 months since Germany's election. They can't form a government, and now they're looking at a new election. And Angela Merkel may be on her way out because even though her party won the election, it was by a slim margin. And during the weeks leading up to the election, Angela Merkel appeared to be softening her position on the open borders and saying, well, maybe there needs to be controls and maybe we need to rethink this. And then, of course, after she won the election, she went right back to the hard line. The borders will stay open. Get used to the refugees. They're good for you. They're good for our economy. Just, a few thousand raped girls is no reason to reverse policy on this thing. So I think if there is a new election, she's going to do even worse, and she might find herself out the door, because that issue of the open borders is why she can't form a coalition. The other two parties that she is dealing with primarily are all saying it's time to close the borders and get this situation under control. Now, Spain has issued European arrest warrants for the Catalan independence leaders. Some of them are already arrested and in jail, which has triggered massive protests across Catalonia. And it doesn't look like that's really settling down too much. Now, as you know, the World Anti-Doping Agency has just declared by fiat that Russia remains non-compliant with its code. Russia is saying that the earlier claims of doping that kicked Russian athletes out of some of the events of the last Olympics and completely out of the Paralympics were fraudulent, and they've even pointed the finger of blame at the CIA. But the World Anti-Doping Agency is saying Russia is non-compliant, which raises the possibility that Russia will be banned from the upcoming Winter Olympics in South Korea. And Russian TV is basically saying that if Russia is discriminated against in this way, they're not going to carry the Olympics at all inside Russia on any of the Russian TV. Let's take a phone call. Francis in North Carolina. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello, aloha to you both.
Aloha.
Snack Barnall. I tell you what, I have to agree with an earlier call you had about the aspect of regarding, Roy Moore and the whole distract scenario and so on ad nauseum, because it just sounds so typical if you really think about it.
Okay.
So distract from one hand with another hand as to what's really going on. Now, I have a quick question for you as to your train of thought of how you would deal with this. You find out, now this is just an example for you.
Okay.
In light of what's been going on across the U.S. with various shootings of this and shootings of that and, the whole 9 yards, as it were, ad nauseum, and you go to a nearby theater, and they decide they want to check out your bags and all that stuff because, we want to make sure that there's enough space for folks and all that, as well as we want to make sure for your security and all that you have nothing funky in your bags besides, like, say, your knitting needles or something, or yarn you were playing with besides your handbag. And you've never had to experience that before. And so you call up the management and inquire about what the story is with that. Being that when you go into the theater, there's no issue with space and all that since it's tucked between your feet before the viewing is done. Now, there's two possible options. You can either go there and allow them to go and possibly go through and say, okay, we're going to make sure that's yarn you got, we're going to make sure that's needles you got, we're going to make sure that what you say is in your knitting bag is what you really got in there. Or, and basically go through that just to go to see a film, which is totally absurd, in light of all this other garbage that's been going on that they're using as an excuse. Or, secondly, basically boycott the bloody theater, and whoever happens to ask where you saw the film, tell them, well, I would have seen it at this theater, but since they treat you like a criminal and want to search whatever you have with you because they're afraid you're going to do something stupid or whatever, or silly, or who knows what, even though you're in it by... you're past a certain age range.
Francis, I want to cut you off because we're coming up on a commercial break. First of all, you can actually kill people with a knitting needle, so that may have not been the best example. But you're right. I would do the boycott. And the last time Claire and I were in Southern California, we decided we were going to go visit Disneyland because we hadn't been there for a decade. And we got there, and all the new post 9/11 security was there with the metal detectors and everything, which I was okay with. But yeah, there was this huge long line of people going past this table, and the security people were just going through all the purses and camera bags and everything. And I turned to Claire and I said, I'm not going to do this. And I'm not carrying anything other than a camera, but, going through this security check is going to completely destroy, my happy feeling about being at Disneyland. And we literally turned around and we walked. We never went into the park that day. We never bought our tickets, and probably will never go back there again as long as that kind of attitude is there. And it's not because I'm a criminal or a terrorist. It's because I'm a private person, and I do not want to be treated like a criminal when I am not, in fact, a criminal.
You're nailing it.
Yeah.
You're nailing it. I mean, as I explained to the theater management, I told them, I said, listen, at my age, I mean, come on. You're talking about throwing common sense out the bloody window over some, shall we say, falsely set up scenarios where apparently some people did get hurt or whatever, or lost their life, whatever the case might be, and so forth. But, I mean, you're talking about in a neighborhood where everybody just about knows everybody else. How do you have a situation like that carry over? You don't. I mean, this is purely ridiculous. So the only thing I'm resolved to is basically boycotting the theater, and just, if someone asked me, like I said before, say, no, I wouldn't go there because, well, quite frankly, they're unfriendly to knitters.
Well,
that's all there is to it. You want to knit? Go somewhere else.
Basically, Claire and I, we don't go to theaters anymore for a variety of reasons. We're willing to wait the extra couple of months until the movies come on cable, because then we're comfortable in our own home. Certainly the food that we have here is a lot healthier for us than what they sell at those theater snack bars. But, we've grown out of that age where we have to see the movie as soon as it comes on out. In fact, we're perfectly willing to let other people see the movie and then say, boy, this one really is terrible, and then we don't waste our time on it. Okay? We got to take a break for commercials. Francis, thank you very much for the phone call. We're going to let you go, and we'll be back after these words from our sponsors. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. Coming up on the top of the hour, and the lovely lady Claire. And apparently over in Washington State, there is a U.S. Navy pilot, F-18 pilot, who's in a lot of trouble because apparently after taking off from Whidbey Island Air Station yesterday, he basically used the contrail from his jet to draw a male anatomical member in the skies high over Washington State. So, again, is this who you want to go into combat with? On a more serious situation, as you know, Wolfgang Halbig is being sued by a reported father of one of the Sandy Hook students, and is basically trying to drive Halbig out of business and shut him up and silence him. But so far, it looks like the judge is ruling more or less in favor of Halbig. And apparently Posner wanted to punish Halbig with a hold in contempt for recording a previous court hearing, which, by the way, is perfectly legal under the laws of the state of Florida. And the plaintiff was trying to sue Halbig over posting the plaintiff's already public information, which is not a crime. All right, we're going to take a phone call here. Sherry in Texas, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. Thank you. The 1%, I think they know that no one can afford their products anymore. I don't think the money junkies whose brains have been so distorted, I don't think they need an independent buying public to be rich. And their whole idea is to create addicts and dependents. Addicts through drugs, dependents through debt, because their goal, which is not going to work, by the way, is that 1%, they want to get rich on the back of a working class whose wages are paying for all the stuff they want us to buy, all the designated houses and automobiles, is all going to come out of their wages. In other words, we're going to be a nation that is what they would like us to be. These corporations will narrow our choices.
There's a problem. There's a problem. Whether it's people not having enough money to buy goods at shopping malls, or people not having enough money to pay their debts, or people not having enough money even to be drug addicts. all of these plans fall apart unless the working and middle-class people have got decent jobs that pay decent wages and salaries so that they've got the money to buy whatever it is the money junkies want to sell us. If we can't buy anything, whether it's illegal drugs or a flat panel TV set, then the money junkies don't have any more money coming on in, and that's their problem. Their mental illness is they can't appreciate the money they already have. They only get that cocaine-like thrill when another big chunk comes on in, and that's the psychology of what's going on and why these money junkies are as dangerous to society as they are.
Yeah, but Mike, they just want to be. They don't want us to be the owners of businesses. They want us just to be employees.
They want to. They want to bring back. They want to bring back.
They just want us to be employees. They'll give us the jobs.
Okay,
and the houses.
No, they won't.
We pay out of our wages.
No, if they had the jobs to give us, they would have given them to us by now. Anyway, we got to let you go for station identification, and we'll be back with Claire after these few words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here, hour number 3. And for those of you watching on BAM User TV, this gorgeous creature sitting next to me is the lovely Lady Claire, and bringing us her unique perspective on the world. And what is it you want to talk about today?
Well, yesterday, TransCanada Corporation had to shut down part of its Keystone oil pipeline system. They had a 5,000-barrel leak in South Dakota 4 days before neighboring Nebraska was set to decide on the company's long-delayed Keystone XL pipeline.
Well, that's embarrassing.
It's more than embarrassing. I mean, remember all of those people who were peacefully protesting and saying this is a really bad idea, guys? Turned out they were absolutely right.
Yeah, I mean, the oil companies keep saying, we're going to build a pipeline and it's not going to leak. Yes, it's going to leak. They always leak. It's not a matter of if, it's always a matter of when. Yeah. And you've got to be thinking, where is that oil going to go? And certainly in the case of the Keystone protest on the Native American lands, their concern was that a leak in that pipeline was going to feed oil into their source of fresh water.
Yeah.
Now, raw petroleum coming out of the ground is a carcinogen. It is toxic.
Yes.
You don't want to be drinking it. You don't want to be bathing in it. You don't want to cook in it. You don't want to be irrigating your crops with it or giving it to your livestock. And the funny thing is, the original pipeline right-of-way had gone by another town, which was off the Native American lands. But there was a bunch of rich white people who lived in that town, and they said, no, you're not in my backyard. Put it over on the Native American.
Yeah, NIMBYs.
Yeah, the NIMBYs.
The NIMBYs, yeah. You know, and there may be a way to build a pipeline that is ecologically sound and ecologically earth-friendly, but I don't think we're there yet, Mike.
Oh, no, it's possible to build a pipeline that's not going to leak. The problem is that they don't want to spend the money.
Yeah.
They want that pipeline to go through as cheaply as possible to maximize their profits. And again, the Environmental Protection Agency and the Minerals Management Service, both of which have jurisdiction over here, they're not enforcing any kind of safety standards.
No. You know, just as when we had the Gulf oil spill. And that was done, that happened because of a completely value-engineered little piece that didn't actually work properly, correct?
Well, basically, the Deepwater Horizon disaster happened for basically 2 reasons. First of all, every other oil-producing nation on Earth requires the installation of automatic acoustic blowout preventers on their drilling rigs. This is a machine that literally listens for a large gas bubble coming up, which is what can allow the column of oil to travel to dangerous speeds and pressures, and it will shut off the valve automatically.
Yeah.
Here in the United States of America, they only mandate the use of a manual blowout preventer, which means somebody has to be paying attention, and if they aren't, the blowout's going to happen. And in the case of the Deepwater Horizon disaster, the manual blowout preventer on that rig was 4 years overdue for mandatory annual maintenance.
Yeah.
And that's why when that column of oil hit it, it basically collapsed like a styrofoam coffee cup.
Yeah. You know, and this apparently, this pipeline was within about a mile of major water facilities.
Yes.
That, you know, that has to be so scary to anyone who's thinking in terms of long term. I wish sometimes this administration were thinking a little bit better in terms of long-term stuff.
Unfortunately, one of the drawbacks of our particular system of government is that those people who are making these decisions are only thinking in terms of 2, 4, 6, or maximum 8 years, and after that, they're off into the private sector, and so they only think about, what might happen in the next 8 years. Well, probably nothing's going to happen in 8 years, and therefore I don't have to worry about it. And then what we find out, and we're seeing it all across the country, is the collapse of infrastructure decades and decades after it was created, just out of outright neglect. And I'll give you a good example. The irrigation system that turned the western deserts into usable agricultural land. Today it's only delivering about 1/3 of the water that it did when it was first constructed. But nobody wants to write a check to go on out and say, we got to fix this stuff. You hear me about water shortages in Southern California. Part of the reason for that there are huge water mains underneath the city of Los Angeles that are cracked and just dumping usable drinking water into the soil, into the earthquake faults, I might add. And parts of the aqueduct, same thing. They're cracked, and they're just losing huge amounts of water into the desert where it does nobody any good. But nobody wants to spend the money to fix or replace any of this infrastructure because we have to buy bombs and bullets, and we have to drop white-hot flaming death on innocent people around the world until they agree that the United States of America is great again.
It makes no sense. It's crazy making.
Of course it's crazy.
And let's bop on down to the certain situation with uranium-1. Apparently, the Justice Department head has ordered senior federal prosecutors to evaluate whether or not a special counsel should investigate the uranium-1 deal and alleged unlawful dealings related to the Clinton Foundation. Now, apparently, in response, Podesta has penned an unhinged op-ed after the news accusing President Trump and A.G. Sessions of attempting to turn the United States into a banana republic. And we have a shout-out.
Yes, we have a shout-out now to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining our network. Now, interesting, go back up here to this language where Sessions has ordered senior federal prosecutors not to conduct an investigation, but to evaluate whether, and that's his trap door. That's how he's going to get out of it. Because remember, when Sessions was testifying before Congress the other day, he came out and said, I haven't seen enough evidence to justify an investigation into the Clintons.
And the way that he talks in this article, and I'm going to read just a little bit of it. Okay, it's official. President Trump wants to upend 230 years of constitutional history and principle to run the U.S. Justice Department like a banana republic, or perhaps more aptly, like what now passes for the rule of law in the country he aspires to emulate, the Russian Federation. Holy Hieronymus Bosch. I mean, Mike, for heaven's sakes.
Well, it is getting hysterical. I mean, this is way over the top there. We're saying, he's tearing down the founding fathers and the Constitution, and it's banana republic. And Hillary's been hitting this thing. We're a dictatorship now.
Oh, please.
She's out there, and as I mentioned earlier in the show, one of Hillary's supporters came on out and said, well, the tradition is that you don't prosecute the loser in a presidential campaign. No, that's never been a tradition.
No.
And it's ridiculous. If you break the law, you should go to jail, even if you are a loser, Hillary.
Yes.
And, and of course, there was that veiled threat by Hillary in her Mother Jones interview, where she said, if I'm charged, terrible things will happen.
Oh, she probably has the mojo to make some terrible things happen.
I'm sure that if it were not for her dead man switches all over the country, that she would have already fallen out of an airplane or something.
Yeah. I'd like to go over now to the emerging situation with Saudi Arabia. Apparently, Prince Salman is going to be taking over from his dad next week. I don't know why I've got the geopolitical nudges about next week, but I sort of do, and for a number of reasons.
Thanksgiving is a wonderful symbolic target for a false flag act of terror, either on the Macy's parade or one of the football games. And right now, the U.S. is talking about getting involved in major wars around the world. I mean, much worse than we've got right now. But they don't have the support of the American people.
No.
The American people are war-weary. And so the thinking in Washington, D.C. probably is that there's got to be something really horrific, like a nuclear explosion somewhere, where everybody will say, oh, save me, we're under threat. Please take my money, take my children, send them off to horrible deaths here, but just, don't let the bad people get me.
Right, right. There is an emerging relationship between Chinese President Xi Jinping and Saudi Arabia's King Salman. They talked yesterday. And apparently China is looking to get more involved in Saudi Arabia with deals, money, oil export. And I am wondering if perhaps China might be a stabilizing influence on Saudi Arabia instead of maybe going off and doing all these wars. Now, you remember, Mike, back in March, they signed memorandums of understandings and letters of intent, and they were worth about 65 billion U.S. during Saudi King Salman's visit to Beijing.
Now, the big question is,
yeah.
when Crown Prince bin Salman
yes.
assumes the throne,
yeah.
is he going to stay with those deals? Because it certainly looks like his idea is he wants to go to war with Iran,
mm-hmm.
and that is probably not going to go over very well with Russia.
No.
And now they're talking about war in Lebanon, and
yeah.
He could ignite an entire regional war
yeah.
that could lead to a direct military confrontation between the U.S. and a Russian-Chinese axis.
Yeah, you know.
So, again, it's the reason why nepotism really never works on out.
Yeah, yeah. And I am wondering if there is going to be more of an economic turn toward China, because remember, China and the BRICS are getting rid of the dollar, casting off the dollar just as fast as they can do it. And how do you think, Michael, that is going to affect future relationships between Saudi Arabia and the U.S. if they decide that they're going to dump the dollar as well?
Well, I mean, if they end the petrodollar deal, I mean, that's it for the U.S. economy.
Yeah.
Because with insufficient manufacturing and nobody wants our GMO agriculture,
mm-hmm.
Forcing the world to go through the U.S. dollar for a small fee
yes.
Is the only thing that is actually bringing any kind of new wealth into the U.S. economy.
Mm-hmm.
And so if that collapses, then we're going to see the beginning of runaway hyperinflation in this country. We're
mm-hmm.
going to be walking around like people in Zimbabwe with paper notes in our pockets that says $100 trillion, and it's going to really be worth about 12 cents.
Yeah, yeah.
Leading to the inevitable collapse, as eventually did happen to Zimbabwe.
Yeah, yeah. But I am wondering if maybe Xi Jinping can move Prince Salman away from the concept of war as a way to get what he wants, and perhaps toward economic measures. What do you think?
Well, I'm not too sure. I'm getting a sense of Crown Prince bin Salman of being very brash.
Mm-hmm.
He's certainly assertive with this purge idea,
mm-hmm.
and this idea that all the people who are arrested in the purge can go home if they give 70% of their wealth to the crown.
Yeah.
So I don't know that he's a diplomat, and I'm very alarmed at his openly aggressive talk against Iran and Lebanon and who knows where on else.
Mm-hmm.
And he may just be caught up in the glory of his new job, because remember, up until just a few months ago, he was not in line for the throne.
Not at all.
And the former crown prince was deposed, and the new crown prince was crowned, and he may just be caught up in that rush of having all this power and about to acquire more.
Yeah.
And I get a sense he's reckless.
Yeah, I feel that he is also, especially how hard he and the U.S. are hitting Yemen right now. And they've got cities in Yemen that, because of the bombing of the infrastructure and the blockade, there's no water.
Yemen is an absolute humanitarian disaster,
Yeah.
and again, this is not making Saudi Arabia look good to the rest of the world, or the United States, which is paying for it all.
Yeah,
and,
we're colluding in war crimes. It's the only way to say it.
The U.S. Air Force is providing the refueling tankers for the Saudi warplanes.
Yeah.
But the reality is, if you look at how poorly Saudi Arabia has been doing in Yemen,
mm-hmm.
it is obvious that they are really not an efficient military power. They still fly the F-14. And that may be the reason why they're making overtures to Israel, because Crown Prince bin Salman may be thinking that he can use Israel to go after Saudi Arabia's enemies, the way Israel uses the United States to go after Israel's enemies.
Mm-hmm.
And I think he's going to have a very rude awakening on that particular issue.
Yeah, I think so. And one of the things I think President Trump has to keep in mind is that, there's a lot of cheerleading in Riyadh. and a lot of cheerleading in Tel Aviv for regime change in Tehran, but only at the cost, Mike, I think, of American blood.
Yes.
And American money.
That's certainly Israel's position.
Yeah.
They don't. Their children are precious. They don't want to risk them in a fight. I mean, they'll go over and they'll whoop on the Palestinians who don't really have the means to fight back. But, Iran is not completely a military peer because they don't have nuclear weapons, and Israel does. Mm-hmm. But it's going to be a very hard fight. And Israel wants the U.S. to fight it for them, just like Israel used the United States to go after Iraq.
Yeah. And we can all see how well that has gone.
Oh, yeah, what a wonderful thing. I mean, the U.S. is stuck in all of these quagmires all over the globe, and they can't get disentangled. Mm-hmm. I think the U.S. military is already too extended. Even the Air Force is saying they've got too many missions for the pilots that they have, and they're trying to get new pilots to come on in.
Yeah, and they were going to recall a lot of pilots a couple of weeks ago. Remember that article?
They had to back off on that because all of those pilots who had done their tour of duty and had been discharged, and yes, the rules say they can be recalled to active service at any time, but they were all saying, we've established lives, we've got businesses, we've got jobs out here that we will lose if we're called back to active service. Again, I'm very concerned about a story we had earlier in the week where Gallup has come on out with a poll in which they claim 49% of Americans think that all young people should have mandatory military service, which sounds suspiciously to me like the run-up to activating the draft.
Yeah, I have been feeling that that's going to be coming about very shortly. And it's not going to be just our young men this time. It's going to be their sisters and their wives and their aunties. Yeah.
Well, within the age limits.
Yes, within the age limit.
Now, one thing the Army did is apparently they've pulled back on this idea of allowing mentally ill people to enlist. And it's not that they're not going to be mentally ill when they come back from the tour of duty, but we shouldn't send them over there already, hearing voices in their head.
No.
But the Army's pulled back on that because of the negative optics on that.
Yeah. The other thing that I'm noticing with this move of Saudi Arabia is that they seem to be ready to throw the Palestinians and the potential for a Palestinian homeland just right under the bus. And I can't imagine how absolutely betrayed the Palestinian people and the leadership must feel that, it's okay to just throw us under the bus if you're Saudi Arabia, because that's exactly what it looks like is happening.
Well, this is actually going to increase tension between Saudi Arabia and its other Muslim Arab allies in the region, because they have remained united on this idea that the Palestinians do deserve their own state and their own home. And now, apparently, under Crown Prince bin Salman, the idea is, we need a partnership with Israel because we need them to fight our war. And we're going to drop the whole issue of Palestine. I don't think the other countries in the Mideast are going to do that. But again, this could turn into a regional war involving all of these countries.
Yeah. And the other thing that we have to remember when we're talking about regional war is the 90,000-pound gorilla, excuse me, on the Bösendorfer, and that's Russia. Russia has its military and its political leadership has said over and over, if Iran gets hit, we're going to go to their aid. War with Russia over Iran? Folks,
and look how well Russia did against the U.S. inside Syria.
Oh, my gosh. I mean, people are just beating, and especially military personnel, are beating a path to their doors because their military equipment has held up, it's shown up, and it's done amazing things.
And it's less expensive than the American.
Yeah,
remember that big stink when Turkey decided to buy the Russian S-400?
There will be consequences.
Yeah, NATO's threatening them. And maybe that's the reason they put Erdogan's name on the enemy part of the NATO exercise map.
What part of brain dead did they not understand, Michael, when they did that?
Turkey's pulled out of the NATO exercises, and it may just be the end of Turkey being part of NATO. Turkey is clearly pivoting the other way. We're at the stage of the World War where everybody is choosing what side they're going to be on.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, more of these countries are pivoting toward Russia, China, and that part of the world than to the U.S. And the U.S. has its traditional allies over in Europe, but Europe, like the United States of America, is bankrupt. It is in turmoil over the open borders.
Yeah.
Its military is aged, overpriced, and not working very well. And folks, if we don't stop this world war dead in its tracks, we're going to lose this one, even if it goes nuclear.
Yeah, it's scary to contemplate. And what is also scary to contemplate is that with any 16-year-old kid, teenager, coming up in this world, there hasn't been a day in their lives when the United States hasn't been at war with somebody.
Okay, well, we're going to take a break for commercials, and we'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And Claire, your next story, please.
Well, this really, really concerns me. Apparently, the U.S. is developing a ground-based cruise missile banned by a Cold War treaty that the U.S. and Russia signed some time ago over alleged Russian threat, because it believes that Russia has already violated the agreement.
Well, basically what the U.S. is doing is they're breaking another treaty agreement, and they're trying to explain it away by saying, well, we're pretty much convinced the Russians have already broken the treaty, so it's okay for us to break the treaty.
Secdef Mathis, I have a little bone to pick with you, sir. With all of the money that the Pentagon has and all of the intelligent resources, why are we guessing instead of knowing for a fact and calling the Russians on them, if in fact that's what they're doing? Because it would seem to me, with all the billions and all the intel that the United States government allegedly has to bring to bear on this, that we would know and not guess. But I think you're right. I think the guessing is the way to sell another broken treaty.
That's exactly right.
Yeah,
Okay.
It used to be, or maybe I was just in my geopolitical infancy, but I used to believe that there was a point in U.S. geopolitics when we were actually able to negotiate in good faith and get something done. But that doesn't seem to be the way we've run this country, or the elites have run it for quite some time now.
Unfortunately, the U.S. has violated so many treaties and broken its word so many times. It's impossible to get a diplomatic discussion going. In fact, that's why you have people like Nikki Haley, where all they can say is, do what we tell you to do or we're going to bomb you. And that's not a very diplomatic thing to say, but that's basically all they've got left. And again, I keep going on back to this idea where they're trying to talk about, now they want a new deal with Iran to give up its ballistic long-range, medium-range missiles.
Oh, please.
Same thing with North Korea giving up the thing. But look at what happened in Libya. Libya was convinced to give up their nuclear weapon program on the promise they'd be left alone. Then they got invaded.
Right.
Syria gave up their chemical weapons on the promise they'd be left alone. They got invaded. Saddam gave up his chemical weapons on the promise Iraq would be left alone. Iraq got invaded. And so with a track record like that, it's very obvious that nobody can take the word of the federal government about anything at all. I mean, look how they lied to us all about Saddam's nuclear weapons. So at this point, they don't have anything to work with diplomatically. In fact, Putin even made the comment that the worst mistake he's made as president of Russia was to trust the United States government.
Yeah, and at a NATO conference last week, Jim Mattis, Secretary of Defense, made the comment, we have a firm belief now over several years that the Russians have violated the INF, and our effort is to bring Russia back into compliance. What is firm belief? I could believe in the spaghetti monster, a flying spaghetti monster. It doesn't make it real.
What do you mean it's not real?
I'm sorry, it's not real.
Next you're going to tell me Santa Claus isn't real.
Honey, I'm so sorry to hit you with this. But seriously, no, I want a government that doesn't have a belief, but has knowledge, and is not acting on belief per se, but is acting on incontrovertible evidence.
No, we have a belief. Again, this is the updated version of Saddam's nuclear weapons or Assad's chemical weapons. It's just another. And again, the U.S. wants to break the treaty and build these banned weapons, and their excuse is, we think. We looked into our crystal ball. We did the tarot cards. We read the tea leaves, and we're pretty sure
and we talked to Miss Cleo.
Pretty sure Putin is building these things in his basement rec room, in his man cave.
Yeah, right. It makes no sense. I mean, it's great for the U.S. military-industrial complex, but what about being great for we the people? Not so much, Michael. Not at all.
Not when those missiles start flying back our direction.
Yeah, and living on a first strike target here in the middle of the Pacific that we know China can obliterate. This doesn't exactly make me feel very full of Zen-like calm right now.
No, that's why I buy so much vodka.
You know, it's unfortunate when I look at my key ring, okay, and this is sort of a metaphor for where we are. And yes, I've got many keys for the church offices because I conducted a local Methodist church. But on one of the little containers.
Oh, we got to take a break here.
Is potassium iodide.
Yes, we have. In case of a nuclear attack, we got all the prepping done that we can do. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And Claire, what is your next story?
Well, the next story comes out of globalresearch.ca. It's a Canadian blog. And a gentleman I like to link to a lot by the name of Stephen Linman.
Yes.
Now, Stephen is more of a progressive, but I think he's a very honest guy. He writes very cleanly and very clearly. And I think we may need to just get rid of those labels, liberal and progressive, because we're all fighting for truth and freedom here. No matter what, well...
I think it's a little early to get rid of those labels because they are the two ideological camps in our country right now, conservatism and liberalism.
Yeah.
And amazingly enough, the meaning, what they actually mean has changed over time.
Oh, it's morphed. But he was asking the question, Israel and Saudis, best of friends? And there was apparently an op-ed given on a Saudi-owned, London-based elaf.com where the IDF chief of staff, Gadi Eisenkot, said Israel is willing to share intelligence with Riyadh.
Yes, Riyadh needs to be very careful about that because much of Israeli intelligence they share is just made up nonsense. Remember, where Iraq was building nuclear bombs underneath the power station at Osirak, and then Israel bombed the power station at Osirak. Following the Iraq War, international observers went on in, and all they found were the ruins of a power station. There was no secret bomb factory underneath it, as Israel had claimed.
Yep.
And like Israel actually has underneath Dimona. So this will definitely work to Israel's advantage, but not necessarily to Riyadh.
Right.
And my concern is that Crown Prince bin Salman, he's had a very, luxurious youth traveling around and doing what people with lots of money are allowed to do. And I think in some ways, my read of him is that he is as naive assuming the throne of Saudi Arabia as Donald Trump was going into the White House. And I think he's going to get used by Israel.
Yeah, it could happen. But Eisenkot made a statement that I had to kind of look at and go, whoa, sir, are you serious? Are you kidding me? And he said, we are ready to exchange experiences with moderate Arab countries and exchange intelligence to confront Iran, and Iran is the region's greatest threat. Now, let's just pull back from that a little bit. I don't know how Eisenkot is characterizing Saudi Arabia as moderate, but I couldn't go there as a Christian. I would get flogged. I would get parts of my body probably cut off, or I would get killed. The same with you as an atheist, or the same with him as someone who espouses the Jewish faith. How in the name of Sam Hill is he calling current Saudi Arabia moderate?
Well,
how is he
now
selling that?
let's be honest. Crown Prince bin Salman has stated that he wants to move Saudi Arabia to a more moderate form of Islam, less hard line.
Okay.
But again, the idea is Saudi Arabia is going to be pitching this idea at the meeting of the Arab League.
Yes.
That they all need to gang up on Iran because Iran somehow represents a threat to the region. When again, it is Saudi Arabia that is making the war talk alongside Israel.
Yes, yeah. I mean, as you have mentioned many times before on the show, Iran hasn't started a war in like 200 years.
They have not initiated a war of conquest against another country in over 200 years, a claim that certainly the United States and Israel cannot come close to. Israel can't seem to go 6 months without attacking and bombing somebody.
Yeah.
And same thing these days with the United States. I mean, now we're pouring into Somalia.
Yeah. And both countries, both Israel and Saudi Arabia, are warrior nations. And Saudi Arabia has funded some of the worst Islamic terror in the region.
Yes.
You know, ISIS, Al-Qaeda, al-Nusra, et cetera, et cetera. You know, and there are a lot of names of a lot of these groups. And the alignment of the United States with these groups, which has been proven and documented over and over again, you know, it just boggles the mind. These groups are used anywhere the government wants to create trouble.
Yes.
Duterte found that out in the Philippines.
Yes.
Real quick. And, yeah, you know, I am very uncomfortable being a citizen of a country that is constantly committing war crimes around the world. Right?
Absolutely, absolutely. You know, what's looking at the situation today reminds me of something that happened way, way back before we even went into Iraq the first time. And there was this story coming out about how the State Department was going around the world securing treaties with other countries that U.S. Military officers and government officials could not be sent to The Hague for war crimes trials. And everybody was saying, what the heck is going on? And I said, well, it's very obvious. If they're trying to indemnify themselves from war crimes charges, they're planning on committing war crimes. And that is, of course, exactly what's happened. Use of torture and white phosphorus into residential areas, all kinds of things.
Yeah, you know, and they've been using, the Saudis have been using depleted uranium, and now they're having, in Yemen, and now they're having this just huge explosion of birth defects.
Yes.
Stillbirths.
Same thing that happened in Iraq.
Yeah.
With the depleted. Same thing that happened to our returning veterans from Iraq.
Yeah.
That's one of the big covered up stories in the military, in the veterans area, is how many of those veterans returning from Iraq came home, decided they were going to have a family, and there's just this epidemic of severe birth defects.
Yeah.
Because daddy or mommy inhaled some of that depleted uranium dust, and they're contaminated now.
Yeah, you know, and to poison a child in the womb deliberately, I cannot tell you how completely horrific morally, I don't care what your religious aspect is, but morally it is one of the most horrific things you could do to a little baby.
Well, it's not that anybody said we're going to go on out and cause all these birth defects, especially among the families of our own returning veterans. It's just not a consideration. They want to use the depleted uranium because it's denser than lead. It carries more energy from the artillery to the target.
Yeah.
And the fact that when it vaporizes, it becomes this highly toxic cloud of dust that is carried on the wind is irrelevant to that idea. And along with that, of course, the U.S. is making our nuclear waste problem somebody else's nuclear waste problem by taking our nuclear waste and making bullets with it and shooting it into other countries.
Yeah, yeah. It just... It's very scary morally to me what the United States as a government is doing out there.
Yes.
And I wish that there were some stronger voices against it, like our Tulsi Gabbard.
Yes.
You know, if the Democrats are looking for someone unsullied, they could bring forward for 2020, it's got to be Tulsi Gabbard.
It's never going to happen because she is anti-war. And the war agenda is controlling everything. I mean, Donald Trump campaigned saying no more foreign interventions, and look how quickly they got him corralled and compromised, and he's out there now, you know, saying, yes, let's fling rockets and stuff at everybody.
Yeah, you know, white hot death. I'd like to bop on over to some information about the vaccine industry, the medical industrial complex. It's been a couple of bad years for the vaccine cartel.
Good.
And the Council on Foreign Relations mistakenly proved that the largest outbreaks of infectious diseases are within the most highly vaccinated populations.
Imagine my shock.
Oh, my gosh. And it was especially the case for measles, mumps, rubella, polio, pertussis outbreaks. And, you know, you're looking at countries, primarily the U.S. and the West, the European Union, and New Zealand, each with the highest number of mandated vaccines, led the list of nations where these problems just seem to get worse. And apparently that whole concept of herd immunity absolutely failed to begin with. And given the repeated incidences of infectious outbreaks in populations where you've got like 94% or more vaccine compliance, you've got also the emergence of new viral strains. And so the concept of herd immunity needs to be just thrown out the window because it's not working.
It's snake oil is really what it is.
Yeah.
And getting on back to the issue of aluminum being used as an adjuvant, aluminum is a known neurotoxin, and we're pumping something like 1,000 micrograms of it into the arm of newborn children in their first 18 months of life. They're getting all of this. And my understanding is there was only ever one study done of this aluminum adjuvant being harmful, and it was done with some rabbits where they were injected with this aluminum adjuvant, and they were allowed to live their lives, and apparently they succumbed to some serious medical issues, all caused by the aluminum. But the study never actually had a report because apparently at the last minute, the bodies of the rabbits all disappeared mysteriously.
How convenient.
Yes, just... They were here last night. I have no idea. Well, we
magic rabbits.
Can't do an autopsy, can't complete our report.
Yep. And when you get to influenza vaccines, I mean, that's never been a really exact science of any kind. But for the 1992, 1993, 1997, 1998 seasons, the vaccine concoction of flu strains was only 16% effective, and a lady by the name of Catherine Severin, who monitors the actual WHO prediction results and compares them with CDC claims, has stated that, depending upon the study cited, flu vaccine efficacy actually ranges from a low of 0%.
Well, they finally figured out what's going on, and the problem is that they're culturing the flu virus in egg albumin. And the problem is the flu mutates to adapt to the fact that it's dealing with chicken proteins. And so when it's harvested from the albumin and made into the vaccine, it is now basically looking for the wrong flu.
Oh, boy.
When it's injected into humans.
That's
and
no
that
good.
is a big reason why it doesn't work.
Yeah.
We have a phone call here. Rod in Arizona. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Well, Mike, I wanted to mention something that I've been hearing a lot of things that haven't been really talked about in the news recently. But I'm a combat veteran. I'm a disabled vet. I served in the Army during my time in Iraq. And one of the things that I've been noticing a lot of people have been talking about in the news is the whole arms deal going on with Saudi Arabia and stuff like that. One of the things that really upsets me the most going on right now is right now our government is arming Saudi Arabia that is passing its weapons down to Sunni Muslim terrorists that are Al-Qaeda. And the same terrorists that caused 9/11, same terrorists are receiving our weapons now. And our current government is allowing this to happen.
Well, let's clarify that a little bit. The same terrorists who were blamed for 9/11 are receiving these weapons. But the real perfidy is the fact that Obama and Hillary Clinton, and presumably it's continued into the present administration, have been sending these massive amounts of heavy weapons, including 155-millimeter artillery, into the hands of ISIS. At the same time, we were seeing all these made-up videos to convince us ISIS was the enemy we should all be afraid of.
Yep, I completely agree. And it's just, to me, it's one of the most upsetting factors of me serving in Iraq and seeing now that the same people that I went into the military for to fight against are now receiving the same weapons. This just really reminds me of exactly what happened during the whole Mujahideen, I can't say their names, the guys in Afghanistan that we armed back in the 1970s during the Soviet War with Russia and Afghanistan. And that's exactly what I'm seeing here is a repetition of history. It's really unnerving.
Well, it is because, again, and I respect your service in the military, and I'm sorry that you're disabled, but you were actually in Iraq to guarantee that Iraq's oil was going to be sold for the U.S. dollar. And there were no weapons of mass destruction. And, so I'm sure you've read Major General Smedley Butler's little pamphlet, War's a Racket.
A long time ago, to be honest with you.
You might want to dig that up again and take another read there, because here was a guy who worked his way up through the ranks of the Marine Corps, and he did what he was told. He obeyed his orders, and then finally when he retired, he took a good look at himself and what he'd done and realized that these wars he'd fought in were not about freedom or democracy or anything beneficial to the general population. It was always about advantages to American corporations over foreign corporations, and we're still seeing exactly the same thing today. Again, look at that warning from NATO to Turkey when Turkey wanted to buy the Russian S-400 missile instead of the much more expensive and inferior American system. No, you will buy from the Americans.
Yeah.
You know, there will be consequences.
And you know, that's the saddest part about it is, you know, when I was young, when I was 18, I joined the military for that cause. That was my mentality. You know, I actually joined in the right when the September 11th attacks happened in 2002. That was my whole motive because I wanted to do something for my country.
Yes.
And, you know, it just, finding out these facts 10, 15 years after the fact, I mean, we're still in the war on terror.
Yeah.
And now we're using the same blanket, you know, war, you know, claim that was done by Congress because of 9/11 to attack people that literally have never attacked us.
Yes.
And I understand they're not friendly people, but literally they never attacked us. Like the Houthi rebels in Yemen,
yeah.
we have never been attacked by Houthi rebels.
No.
And it just blows my mind that Saudi Arabia, again, even with the past administration and the current administration, is giving weapons to armed Islamic terrorists that perpetrated 9/11. And yeah, both administrations are to blame here, but I'm going to be blunt with you. You know, Obama did it too, but Obama's not president anymore. Donald Trump is.
Yes.
Right.
And he supposedly claims that he's tough on terror, but how do you claim to be tough on terrorism when you still provide one of the worst Wahhabi terrorist states in the world that beheads Christians and anybody who's not Muslim these weapons? It makes no sense to me. It boggles my mind.
No, the U.S. is using Saudi Arabia as a proxy.
For oil.
Certainly in Yemen. Well, there's the oil, the petrodollar deal. But the U.S. is using Saudi Arabia as a proxy because the American people are sick and tired of more wars. What happened in Yemen was that several years ago there was a U.S. intervention in Yemen that brought down the Yemen's elected government and imposed puppet rule. And the Houthi rebels are the ones who said, no, we want a Yemeni government in Yemen, and they kicked the puppet rulers out. And that's when the U.S. went to Saudi Arabia and said, you go into Yemen, you slap those people down and tell them they have to love their puppet rulers. We have to take a break for a commercial here. Rod, thank you very much for the phone call. We're going to take a break here, back with the last segment of our program.
Take care.
And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. Last segment of our show on this Pauhana Friday. We've got time enough for just 2 more phone calls, and we're going to start here with Arthur in Massachusetts. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. This is Arthur. How you doing?
I'm doing great.
All right. I called in a while back. I wanted to talk to you about a couple things. The other one, which I never got to, which was this Iranian building collapse. Did I ever touch on that with you?
It doesn't ring a bell.
Are you familiar with that? AE 9/11 Truth has a thing up about it. I guess if you went, I don't know how you'd search that, but because they have so much stuff. But it seems that it was a controlled demolition. It's the same as the trade centers.
Yes.
So you are familiar with that?
Well, I know that when buildings collapse naturally, they tend to fall over to one side, and it's only a controlled demolition that will bring a building down into its own footprint.
Yeah, pancake it.
Yes, and I just hope you'll look at that. I mean, I'm not sure what it amounts to. I mean, it's just another example, but it's, of course, it was a secret. I mean, it was whatever the word is. You know, nobody. They're still trying to say that it just happened. Similarly.
All right. Well,
anyway, I have one more thing, and I'll let you go.
Real quick, because we're running out of time.
And did you ever get back to the Corbett report and Creature from Jekyll Island guy saying that order 000 or whatever it is, Kennedy's order, was this was a fabrication or had been somehow blown? Not that it didn't happen. It's that it didn't threaten the bankers, that he was not a threat to the bankers. And it was attributed to the guy that just died, Jim Mars.
Well, obviously, Corbett and I disagree on that. Because, again, if it was not a threat to the bankers, then how did John J. McCloy wind up on the Warren Commission? Because he was a banker, president of the World Bank and the Chase Manhattan Bank. There's no reason for him to be there. He's certainly not qualified to investigate the murder of a president unless he's there to cover up a financial link. Anyway, listen, we're going to let you go. We're almost out of time, and I want to fit in Jack in Atlanta. Jack in Atlanta, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yes. Hi, Mike and Miss Claire.
Hello.
Jack from Atlanta. Yes.
Whoop.
Oh, no. Did we just lose Jack?
We just lost it again.
Oh, drat.
Okay. Boy, Skype is just... Okay. Okay, Jack, I'm sorry about that. Skype is just really not behaving today.
I'll call again.
Well, no, you've got about a minute here if you want to make your point. Okay, I guess he just hung up. All right, well, there we are. Yeah, we're going to have to find some reason why Skype is just behaving the way that it is, because it has certainly become unreliable. And it's not just here. If you go on out to like Down Detector or some of the other blogs that talk about the state of our computer infrastructure, apparently ever since the release of Skype by Microsoft in August, it has just been almost impossible to use. And maybe it's because Microsoft wants to drive us all to something that we have to pay for, but obviously we need to look at some kind of replacement here for RBN because this has become too unreliable to use for radio. There's the music. Time for Claire and I to get on out of here and get something useful done with the rest of the day. Have yourselves a really good weekend. Stay tuned for John Stadmiller, and he's got lots of interesting things to share with you. Take what you learn at the website. Keep putting that out there, especially Russiagate, Primarygate, Dossiergate. We have to keep pushing those out there against the noise of all the sexual dalliances that are flooding the corporate media. We'll be back on Monday. Aloha, America.